From around the world and here at home now, it's the ITV News at 10.
Could Sir Keir Starmer be in real trouble? Tonight, these images have come back to haunt the Labour leader. Durham police say they are investigating whether this event broke lockdown rules.
We were working in the office, we stopped for something to eat, no party, no breach of the rules.
Having so often called for the Prime Minister and indeed the Chancellor to resign over the issue, the Labour leader would be in enormous hot water if he was fined. Also on News at 10 tonight. Northern Ireland is on the cusp of a historic dawn as Sinn Féin looks on course to become the largest party. A dismal night for Boris Johnson in the local elections, with losses in London and the West Country and signs of a recovery for the Lib Dems.
It's now become a political shockwave that could bring down this appalling Conservative government.
Labour advances too, but is it enough to put its leader within sight of number 10? We'll have all the analysis from our election night experts. And Harry and Meghan are off the balcony, but they will be here for the Queen's Jubilee.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. When Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, went to bed last night, he must have hoped he'd be waking up this morning to a day of good news. The results of local elections against a backdrop of a cost of living crisis and the fallout from parties in Downing Street. What could possibly go wrong? Certainly the results weren't good for the Conservatives, but they weren't good enough for Labour, as we'll be finding out during the programme. But things took a distinct turn for the worse when Durham police said that after significant new information had come to light, they would, after all, be investigating him over that evening in a constituency office when get-togethers were banned, but when beer was drunk and curry was eaten. Sir Keir said again today no rules were broken. Of course, being investigated is not the same as being fined, but should that happen, it would be hard for him to continue after all that he said about the Prime Minister.
How are you? Fantastic.
As Keir Starmer arrived in Carlisle to applause this afternoon, little did he know he was about to be greeted with an investigation that would overshadow his celebrations. As Durham police confirmed, they're looking into what exactly is going on in this video, taken during the Hartlepool by-election campaign when gathering indoors was against the law, unless it was for work. Labour insists there's nothing to see here.
Well, as I've explained a number of times, we were working in the office, we stopped for something to eat, no party, no breach of the rules. The police obviously have got their job to do, we should let them get on with it, but I'm confident that no rules were broken.
Earlier this year, when pictures first emerged of Keir Starmer drinking here, Durham police took the view that they didn't constitute an offence and therefore no further action would be taken. That was until today, when they announced that significant new information had come to light in recent days. The force also said they held off telling us all about their new investigation because of rules in place during the local election campaign. A birthday party in Downing Street did lead to fixed penalty notices for the Prime Minister and Chancellor. While they insist that was also between work meetings, Keir Starmer previously said it was a resigning matter.
Britain deserves better. They have to go.
But with Boris Johnson still firmly in position, Conservatives are holding back on calling out any potential breach of the law.
Clearly there would be an element of hypocrisy if he were to say there's one rule for the Prime Minister and a different rule for me as somebody who wants to become the Prime Minister. But having said that, I really think we don't know all the facts. We should leave this firmly to the Durham police.
In the pub just down the road from where Keir Starmer drank his beer, opinions are divided, but unchanged by today's news.
Boris has had multiple incidents which he's lied and lied and lied. I think Starmer seems a pretty decent guy to me. He seems pretty level-headed.
And this doesn't change your view of him?
No, it doesn't really.
It's one rule for them and another for us, and I've actually recently cancelled my Labour membership because of those kind of issues, really.
There's bigger issues. There's bigger issues than somebody having a beer in the pub.
Many have already made up their minds about what this looks like, but for a man who's built a career on upholding the law, it could become a costly error of judgment. Hannah Miller, News at 10, Durham.
And Robert, of course, joins me here to talk about this. Look, if this was a twist in, your latest political thriller you're watching on TV, you wouldn't believe this. I mean, all the focus on Tory Partygate, everything Keir Starmer says, and here he is, potentially losing his, in a very difficult position tonight if the police fine him, right?
I mean, certainly right. And I have to say, Durham police saying that they've had significant new evidence, you wouldn't say that, I don't think, if you were the police, if you didn't think there was a strong likelihood that Labour and Keir Starmer would end up being fined. So he is in a very difficult position. Now, of course, it is the case that this is seemingly a one-off incident by Starmer and the Labour Party, and many people believe that the Prime Minister may be a serial offender. He's been fined once for one party. There are other parties that the police are investigating that he attended. He's also being investigated by, in a sense, the Parliament's High Court, the Privileges Committee, for allegedly lying to Parliament. So, in theory, if the Prime Minister is found against in all these other cases, we're looking at multiple offences versus one. But the problem for Keir Starmer is that he said that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, should resign for accidentally stumbling in on Boris Johnson's birthday party. And it's quite clear that that was an accident by Rishi Sunak. He was fined for that. So if Keir Starmer were not to resign, if he were fined, he would be accused of gross hypocrisy. A lot of people would say that actually all politicians are as bad as each other. I have to say, I don't think the Prime Minister wants Keir Starmer to resign, because if he resigns, then presumably quite a lot of the country will think the Prime Minister has to resign, which he definitely doesn't want to do.
OK. I feel like a story with many twists and turns left. It's had a lot already, but there may be some to come. Now, there is no doubt who the big winners were in Northern Ireland's elections for the Stormont Assembly and who, indeed, were the big losers. The count isn't over yet, of course, but the Democratic Unionists look to have paid the price for going along with a post-Brexit trade deal that famously put barriers up between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, as we've talked about ad nauseam. Now, that could well help turn Sinn Féin into history makers, quite frankly. For the first time, a nationalist party is on the verge of being the biggest party, and their leader, Michelle O'Neill, is on course, therefore, theoretically, to be First Minister when or if the Assembly sits again. It is, one could argue, a vindication. The former leader, Gerry Adams' decision to move the Republican movement all those years ago from the Armalite to the ballot box, as it was often put during the IRA's campaign of terror. But if you told any of us who witnessed it that this is where we would end up, it would have been hard to believe it.
This kind of breakthrough for Sinn Féin was once unthinkable. But led by Michelle O'Neill, the party of Irish republicanism, of separation from the UK, is now on course to win an election in Northern Ireland, a country they want to abolish.
This is about the future. It can be an historic election. Votes will have to be counted in order to establish that. But I also said the whole way through this campaign that I will turn up on day one, that I lead our team into Stormont, that I will work in partnership with others.
The irony of Sinn Féin's success is that it owes thanks in part to Brexit and the protocol. That there is now an effective sea border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK is hated by unionists, and their voters punished the once dominant DUP for failing to stop it. The DUP is now demanding the protocol is repealed and say Northern Ireland's peace deal is at stake.
The Tory party at Westminster will put a knife through the heart of the Good Friday Agreement if they don't take action. It's as simple as that. So if Boris Johnson's government want to be the government that destroys the peace process in Northern Ireland, just carry on doing what they're doing.
Sinn Féin emerging as Northern Ireland's biggest party is a significant victory, but it is also the beginning of the next crisis in Northern Irish politics. Despite this threat to the Good Friday Agreement, there is a sign voters here want to move beyond the old divide between green and orange. and it is the unprecedented surge of support for the non-aligned Alliance Party.
It's good that in my own constituency we were able to poll just such a strong vote, and I think just show that, you know, East Belfast is a positive constituency. We want a progressive future. We're the constituency where Stormont sits, but we want to see it working.
The counting continues and Sinn Féin are on a clear course for victory. That would not automatically trigger a border poll for a united Ireland, but momentum here is with those who want change.
Only a fool would dismiss the significance of this, the symbolical significance, and given that Sinn Féin are likely to claim top posts in the Republic of Ireland, we have a situation where they're in charge north and south. And remembering also that Scotland is led by someone who wants to accede from the Union, then in terms of a broader context, people start talking about the future of the Union.
Sinn Féin have walked a long path to get here, through the darkest days of the Troubles and the hope of peace talks. Now their anticipated victory is a seismic change in Northern Ireland that would also shake the United Kingdom from the foundations.
Well, let's just put some figures on what has happened so far in those Assembly elections. Nothing less, as Peter was saying there, than a sea change in politics already. A short time ago, the Assembly members elected so far, at least of them, the DUP hold 5 seats. Sinn Féin, on the other hand, have 16, and the Alliance Party have 7. Quite the change. Let's go back and talk to Peter. Now, look, this hasn't happened yet entirely. It looks to be going in a certain direction, but the direction it's going in is frankly incredible to anyone who's followed Northern Irish politics over the years. It's a really, truly historic moment. But what do you think in the round it means for Northern Ireland's position in the UK?
Well, we now have the situation, as you say, Tom. Anyone who'd covered the Troubles era in Northern Ireland right up till now could have never foresaw that you would have Sinn Féin, a party that stands for Irish republicanism, separation from the UK, as the biggest party in Northern Ireland. As I say, Northern Ireland is the country that they want to abolish and create a united Ireland. But their victory doesn't trigger, it's not the mechanism to trigger a border poll. It's not like what we saw in Scottish politics, an SNP majority puts an independence referendum on the table. The Good Friday Agreement is very clear that in order to get a border poll, it's in the hands of Northern Ireland's Secretary of State, the UK Minister. And the terms of that are usually, they're not quite clear, but they're understood to be that it has to be overwhelming support for a border poll. Right now, support for a border poll in Northern Ireland is about 35%, so we're not quite there yet. There's not a clamour for a united Ireland, but it's hugely significant. And also what we can see is that with the threats from the DUP, while the Troubles may be behind Northern Ireland, but trouble is never far away in Northern Irish politics.
OK, Peter, big day tomorrow. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to the results back across the Irish Sea now in the other home nations. And the Prime Minister accepted it had been a tough night. Since he made that assessment, the number of Conservative seats lost on English councils has reached over 300, well into the range of what some pollsters said would be a very bad outcome for the government. Sir Keir Starmer said the results showed Labour was back on track, a turning point he called them. Well, perhaps. Certainly, they turned around some key councils in London, but the Lib Dems and the Conservatives had some surprise gains too.
Barnet had never had a Labour council before. Wandsworth had been blue since 1978. There is no doubt Labour had a great set of results around London. As well as Wandsworth, Margaret Thatcher's favourite Tory council, they took Westminster for the first time since that was created. Keir Starmer popped up to Barnet in North London to celebrate.
And thanks as I look around to each and every one of you and all the teams we had out doing that really hard work across London, across the country. We've sent a message to the Prime Minister. Britain deserves better.
Visiting a school in West London, even the Prime Minister couldn't paint a particularly rosy picture for his party.
This has been a tough night for Conservatives in some parts of the country, and in other parts of the country we're actually moving forward. And so for midterm, it's quite interesting that it's a mixed set of results.
And the local MP blames the Prime Minister. How much are these results down to Boris Johnson personally?
The message I and colleagues have heard on the doorsteps is that people are broadly happy with the direction of the government's policies, but they are dissatisfied with the Prime Minister's conduct. He said that he takes full responsibility for these election results, and I think he needs to demonstrate what that means in practice.
But outside London, it was indeed a mixed picture. Labour struggling to have the same impact. The Tories held them off in Pendle. The SNP held them off in Glasgow.
I'm thrilled. You know, the SNP has increased its share of the vote, increased the number of councillors. We are the largest party in more councils today than we were yesterday. We've won the election.
And the Lib Dems took control of Hull from Labour. In fact, the Lib Dems were resurgent, routing the Tories in St Albans and even winning in the Tory stronghold of Somerset.
I wasn't expecting that. With our victories in Westmoreland and Furness, and our victories here in Somerset, it's now become a political shockwave that could bring down this appalling Conservative government.
But the big question of whether Labour has enough momentum to win a general election wasn't answered. They made incremental gains in the so-called Red Wall, but even in newly Labour Barnet, voters lacked enthusiasm for their leader.
Him as a leader, I think, is fine. He's a bit wishy-washy, but apart from that, he's OK.
He's doing a good job.
Better than Jeremy Corbyn?
Oh, you can answer that.
I think he's better than previous Labour leader. But not perfect for me.
Although the Tories did win back a London council in Harrow, by tonight their number of seats lost was looking very substantial. Yet for all that these elections have been bad for Boris Johnson, they might not have been quite good enough for Keir Starmer. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
Now, in terms of basic numbers, the Conservatives were by far the biggest losers, but Labour were not the biggest winners. That particular accolade, as Carl was saying, goes to the Liberal Democrats. The Greens did OK too. So let's go over to Anushka, who is right here to talk us through the stories behind the seats. Good luck. Over to you.
Tom, let's start with London. It has largely fallen out of love with its former mayor, Boris Johnson. As you heard, his party did take Harrow, but 3 big losses, including Wandsworth, which has been Tory for 4 decades. One Tory MP there told me that they were very emotional and that the leadership should take a long, hard look at what it is offering voters in the capital, and maybe similar concerns on the south coast, given those losses in Southampton and Worthing. Now, the Conservatives might point to younger, more liberal voters moving there from Brighton, but that cannot explain what you've seen just now in Somerset. A huge Lib Dem win in what some would call a blue wall area, because all the MPs elected in 2019 were Conservative. Now, obviously, local election results don't translate directly into general election ones. Some people vote on local issues, others don't turn out, but it is worrying MPs there. One told me today, Boris Johnson's top team needs to change. But look, if Keir Starmer wants to be Prime Minister, we know the Red Wall in the North and the Midlands is key. And they're a mixed picture. Labour winning big in Cumberland and Rossendale and holding on in Wakefield, which experts say makes it likely they'll win the by-election coming up there. But the Tory majority getting bigger in Newcastle-under-Lyme, right by Stoke, and they held Amber Valley. But I want to look at one council in between, Wolverhampton. This is what it looked like yesterday, and today, no change at all. Now, you might think, why am I showing you such a boring result? Well, it is more interesting than it looks, because the seats were last up in 2018 and Labour did very well then. So this is actually progress compared to the last general election. In fact, Labour thinks it means winning back key seats like Wolverhampton North East. So a bad night for the Conservatives. But overall, one of our election analysts here tonight, Colin Rallings, tells me if this is replicated at a general election, Labour would force a hung parliament but not win a majority. And that is at a time of great anger, Tom, about both Partygate and the cost of living crisis.
There is no such thing as a boring result, even in local elections. Anushka, thank you. Well, as Anushka's graphics made admirably clear, there was something a tiny bit topsy-turvy about the Conservatives' performance. They lost more ground in the south of England than they did in the north. Labour's progress in its former stronghold areas in the so-called Red Wall didn't make the party look like obvious government material. Labour knocked some bricks out of the Red Wall, but it's fair to say it's still standing.
1, 2, 3.
It's been a day of mixed emotions for Keir Starmer after a night of mixed results in once loyal Labour heartlands. In Carlisle, he was celebrating the capture of Cumberland Council, greeted with open arms by his supporters, but the reception wasn't so warm elsewhere in the north and the Midlands. In Derby today, no such celebrations. Labour still trailed the Tories in a city they not long ago controlled, gaining just 3 councillors last night. However they try to spin it, it is taking baby steps towards power. And at this play centre, it was clear they have a lot more work to do.
This is the first year that I'd have to reconsider voting for Labour, and that's my honest opinion.
I voted Labour. I voted Conservative last time because they were doing a lot more in the area. But I decided to change because the whole government in London overall didn't seem to be doing that well.
I still would vote Conservative. I know at the minute the policies I agree with, the scandals they've got up to, probably not so much.
But not tempted by Keir Starmer?
No.
If you can't take control of Derby Council, how can the Labour Party win a general election?
So I think what yesterday's results show is we're regaining the trust of the people of Derby under new leadership here locally, under Keir Starmer's leadership on a national level.
In London, clearly Labour is cutting through in a way that it still is struggling to in the Midlands and the North.
Yeah, there is an element of that, but I think these things don't happen overnight.
Elsewhere overnight, Labour failed to gain any seats in Tory-controlled Hartlepool. In Blue Nuneaton, a key Westminster seat, they actually lost councillors, but took control of Kirklees in West Yorkshire and Rosendale in Lancashire. Labour insists the rebuilding job is underway. Progress, though, remains slow. In the towns, it can't win without. Daniel Hewitt, News at 10, Derby.
OK, well, let's go to Scotland now, where the SNP increased the number of its council seats and Labour capitalised on a Conservative collapse to leapfrog them into second place. Let's go to Louise in Glasgow. Louise, and really a pretty good night for Nicola Sturgeon.
It has been. The SNP were expected to be the largest party, but they've made gains, an extra 23 seats, which is the most councillors they've ever had. Crucially for them, they say they're still the largest party in Glasgow, but it's just by 1 seat, edging Labour by a whisker. And that shows the gains that Labour has made, an extra 20 seats across the country, but in some wards also narrowing that gap with the SNP. And their results boost them into second place ahead of the Conservatives. But they haven't made back all that they lost in the 2017 election. One party with no smiling faces today was the Conservatives. They have lost 63 seats in Scotland. Their leader, Douglas Ross, says that is due to Partygate and the Prime Minister.
OK, thank you very much. Well, in Wales, there was a big swing in council seats from Conservative to Labour, and Plaid Cymru took a few off the Conservatives too. Well, let's go to Rhys in Cardiff. Rhys, something of a bounce back for Labour in Wales.
Yeah, definitely, Tom, and a bad day for the Conservatives here, as you were saying. A major upset in Monmouthshire, a Tory heartland, the only council that they had an overall majority in Wales, and they lost it, with Labour falling just shy of a majority there. We haven't had a result like that there since the late 1990s, and virtually all the inroads that the Conservatives made back in 2017 have been wiped out. In the northeast, the heart of the Red Wall in Denbighshire, where the Tories routed Labour back in the last general election, the Tories plummeted from first place to fourth, and it's in those post-industrial areas and the cities that Labour has really solidified its base. The Tories here are putting that down to a challenging national picture, Tom.
Please, thank you very much. Well, as you would expect, on a very big and important night, I'm joined in the studio here by our election night experts, Professors Colin Rallings and Jane Green, but on the plus side, you haven't got to be here all night, and there's no M&Ms beneath the desk. But anyway, let's cut to the quick here. Colin, can I just start you with, we've alluded to it a bit in the programme, Labour, 160 seats behind. They've got a mountain to climb at the next general election. Any sign they were climbing it today?
Well, a little bit. You're right, it's an absolutely huge mountain. They've got to really reverse the result of the last election, which, if you remember, the Tories won 44-32 in terms of share of the vote. That's got to be reversed in Labour's favour. They've got ahead in the polls, I think, today. They've polled more votes than the Conservatives, we think, if we took this across the nation as a whole. But as we heard just now in Wales, and indeed in Scotland and in England as well, in many of the places where they needed to do better, they needed to take a direct swing from the Conservatives. That hasn't happened. What instead has happened is people have shied away from the Conservatives. Pretty poor result for them, it has to be said, and has looked poorer and poorer as the day has gone on. But it hasn't only gone to Labour, it's gone to the Liberal Democrats in England, it's gone to Plaid and Independents in Wales, and it's gone to the SNP, Liberal Democrats and a little bit to Labour in Scotland.
Jane, we have talked time and time again, we talked about it on referendum night for Brexit. We've talked about it on every big night since, this idea that British politics was changing. There's been a reset. The Red Wall was going Tory in massive surprise. Some of the Tory areas were going away from Tory. Do you see today as part of that journey, or are we moving into different sphere here?
So it's been really interesting, actually. I mean, we saw this happening before the Brexit referendum. So Labour was starting to build up support in cities, and the Conservatives started to build support in these areas that eventually then fell in 2019 to the Tories, this so-called Red Wall. So we saw this kind of geographic split. And what's been fascinating today is we've kind of still seen it up to a degree. So we've seen Labour still piling on more support in the capital. And that's quite bad news for the Labour Party, because what they don't want to do is concentrate all of their votes in those kinds of areas. They need a much broader spread across the rest of the country. We've also seen, of course, the Conservatives fall back in the parts of the country where they did really well in 2019, but not to, as Colin was saying, not going to the Labour Party in the kinds of ways Labour needs. The Conservatives still doing better, relatively speaking, in Leave areas of the country. So that split still seems to be a bit weaker, but it's still there. And then we've got this kind of really interesting question now that the Liberal Democrats, as Colin was saying, and the Greens picking up support in parts of the country where you might have thought, OK, this is going to be where Labour makes its comeback. The question, of course, now is, OK, that's a local election. Does that Liberal Democrat support translate into a general election? Or in those areas, can Labour indeed make a comeback in the next general election?
OK, now you don't need to have the great wisdom of foresight to know that the next year or two are going to be very, very difficult for a sitting government, cost of living, all the stuff we know. Can I ask you just for a brief summary, finally, of, is it conceivable that given the headwinds the government's got, Labour could make a breakthrough, or do you just think they've got too far to go?
I think what you'd expect, given the trouble the government's had and is going to go through, as you rather suggest, that they would now be miles behind Labour. If you remember, back in 1995, local elections then, the Conservatives lost 2,000 seats direct to Labour a couple of years before Tony Blair became Prime Minister. Before he became Prime Minister, he was building up that kind of momentum. The momentum isn't there. Whatever Keir Starmer says, yes, they've done better than they did last year, rather better than they did last year, but it's not a general election winning performance.
Jane, very briefly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the Conservatives have been punished today, and they're going into this crisis, into a long crisis, in a bad position. And so a cost of living crisis off the back of a loss of trust is a terrible combination for any party to be facing. So it might be a long 2 years for them.
I think it's going to be a long 2 years for all of us for all kinds of reasons. And another reason coming up, because for a bit of same subject, if you want some extra analysis, try our What You Need to Know podcast, which I recorded just now with Colin and Robert Peston, and it was a very interesting and engaging chat. So do listen on our website or where you usually get your podcasts. So, as I was saying, let's move on to Ukraine and the besieged port city of Mariupol. Around its steelworks, there was the horribly familiar bombardment by Russian artillery. On the streets, though, there was the chilling and, frankly, bizarre scene of tidying up in parts of the city held by pro-Russian forces. They were shifting the debris of days, even weeks of war, to clear the way for Victory Day celebrations on Monday.
Russia's determination to conquer every inch of Mariupol is clear. Strikes on the Azovstal steelworks as attempts continue to rescue hundreds of civilians still trapped here. But in the parts of the city already under Russian control, they're clearing up. A lick of fresh paint for military monuments as Russia gears up for Monday when it celebrates victory in the Second World War. Any reminders of the ugly reality of its latest conflict swept away. But the horrors that occurred here are hard to forget. Babies born in a cold basement as the bombs fell above them. When this was shown on Russian TV, they claimed they were liberating them.
Абсолютно. Но
But a midwife who was there told us a very different story.
это был расстрел.
It was not liberation, Tetiana tells me, just plain murder. Murder of women and children. Tetiana worked as a midwife in Mariupol for 40 years. This photo taken the day Russia invaded.
И я, знаете, я очень благодарна Богу, что
I'm thankful to God that I was there to help those girls, she tells me.
помогла этим детям.
When Russia shocked the world by bombing another Mariupol maternity hospital, one of the injured women was rushed to Tetiana and her team.
Ребята, мой сын, он стоял с двумя.
She tells me they carried out a cesarean as her son held up 2 mobile phones for light.
Вот, когда я
The
подняла
baby boy
глаза,
didn't survive.
ну и всё. Она единственная, она всегда.
His mother touched his hands, his face. She was so courageous. She survived, but inside she was burnt, just like our city, Mariupol.
Как и весь Мариуполь.
These aren't the stories Russia will be telling in the coming days and years, but it's important they're heard. Rebecca Barry, News at 10, Lviv.
The struggling newsagents and corner shop chain McColl's has sadly gone into administration. The jobs of its 16,000 workers in its 1,100 shops are now on the line. The supermarket group Morrison's had a bid turned down this morning, but the billionaire brothers who own Asda are now favourites to buy McColl's out of administration. When the Troop in the Colour ceremony kicks off to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in 4 weeks' time, there will be no place on the Buckingham Palace balcony for her grandson, Prince Harry, and his wife, Meghan, nor in fact for her own son, Prince Andrew. Harry and Meghan will be flying over for the celebrations, but Buckingham Palace has not yet said when or where they might be taking part.
By popular demand, the balcony scene has been the climax of many a royal celebration. Now, by the Queen's own command, the next will feature a slimmed-down cast, just working members of the family. So no invitation for the disgraced Prince Andrew and no place for the estranged Harry and Meghan.
I don't see this as an exclusion. I see this as a very, very pointed move that the celebrations are all about the Queen and the focus must be entirely on the Queen and basically nobody else.
So no distractions needed on the balcony?
So no distractions needed on the balcony.
But distractions there will be. Within an hour of the palace's announcement, Harry's team in America revealed the Sussexes will fly over,
giving everything I can
for some of the Jubilee weekend's events. His worries apparently resolved.
Do you think you'll come? I don't know yet. There's lots of things with security issues and everything else.
At least his second child, Lilibet, will meet her great-grandmother and namesake. There's a starring role for the Gold State coach in a procession which will follow the route of the coronation. Polished up for its first appearance for 20 years, though this time the Queen will not ride in it. Nor is it certain she'll make the concert planned in her honour. Though mobility issues allowing, she is looking forward to seeing as much of the festivities as she can. Still, 4 days to celebrate a historic reign also highlight, as they must, the challenges of old age and the tensions of contemporary family life. John Ray, News at 10.
OK, finally, let's go back to those local elections. And it has been said for months that the Prime Minister's future depended on the results after that birthday party fine. What few people, apart from Durham Police, could have predicted was that today would end with Sir Keir Starmer arguably in even more difficulty over party allegations. He says that no rules were broken that night back in April last year. But Sir Keir's beer is now part of a police investigation with all the pressure that brings. The other big development of the day has been Sinn Féin's surge in Northern Ireland, with the distinct possibility that when all the votes are counted, it could, for the first time, be the biggest party in the Assembly. One final thought. Labour's success in London means that Downing Street itself is in a Labour-controlled council for the first time since Westminster Council came into being. That was in 1964. That's it. Good night. Thanks for watching.